All right, people, here's a story about an American patriot by the name of Gary Webb. This is from the Free Thought Project. Had to stop and think about how to pronounce that. This article is by Johnny Liberty. Okay, journalist who exposed CIA cocaine trafficking would be 63 today, but he shot himself twice in the head. And the corporate media and the government worked together to silence Gary Webb after he helped expose their crimes to the American people. There's a picture of Gary Webb. Look at that guy very closely. That is an American hero, American patriot right there. A truth teller. For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and the Blood Street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to an arm of the Contra guerrillas of Nicaragua run by Central Intelligence Agency. The San Jose Mercury News has found on August 22nd, 1966, the San Jose Mercury News shocked the country with a series of articles entitled "The Dark Alliance," detailing the CIA's connection to the crack epidemic that terrorized the nation in the 80s and destroyed countless lives in its wake. After the article's publication, the story's author, award-winning journalist Gary Webb, was initially hailed as a hero before a massive smear campaign attacked his credibility and destroyed his career. The origins of an American hero. Gary Webb was born August 31st, 1955 in Corona, California. He began his career in investigative journalism in 1978 as a local reporter for the Kentucky Post. In 1980, Gary won his first professional award for a 17-part series called The Coal Connection, which investigated the murder of an international coal company president with ties to organized crime. Webb followed The Coal Connection with a scathing 1985 report called The Doctoring of the Truth. Okay, let's moving forward here. Earthquake. Okay, CIA, crack, and the Contras, the story of a lifetime. It wasn't until 1995 that Gary began work on what would become the biggest story of his career when he received a tip about a cocaine trafficker named Danilo Blandone and his relationship with LA drug dealer Freeway Ricky Ross. Over the course of a year, he interviewed dozens of witnesses, high-level government officials, and drug cartel leaders. After meticulously piecing together his shocking discovery, Webb in the San Jose Someone really wants my email address. Where was I? Over the course of a year, he interviewed dozens of witnesses, meticulously. Webb and the San Jose Mercury Times published The Dark Alliance. While the importance of his report cannot be understated, The Dark Alliance was not the first time reporters had established a connection between the CIA and cocaine trafficking. In 1985, journalists Robert Perry and Brian Barger from the Associated Press reported that various groups of the CIA-backed Contras engaged in cocaine trafficking, in part to help finance their war against Nicaragua. Man, Bixby needs to die. I hate that stupid button. For his reporting on the topic. In a time when the internet was in its infancy, Webb's report was released online with links including to all his sources. So he published everything he had and his proof and the documentation to back up everything he's saying. Demonstrating the power of free and open access to information. Webb's story quickly went viral before the term viral existed. The article garnered hundreds of thousands of clicks every single day, prompting responses from the mainstream media, congressional leaders, activists, and the CIA itself. Initially, the agency seemingly failed to respond to Webb's story, but in true government fashion, it wasn't long before an army of mainstream media outlets began to defend the CIA and attempt to discredit Webb. In 2014, the CIA released documents detailing how they used complicit media and targeted strategy to denounce Webb's 20,000-word report. Nicholas Dumovic, the author of the CIA report entitled Managing a Nightmare, CIA Public Affairs and the Drug Conspiracy Story, The CIA watched these developments closely, collaborating where it should be with the Apple. Man, my voice is starting to hurt. Due to the backlash, okay, this is how I'm going to skim now, okay? This is the Free Thought Project. Here's the title. You can look it up. Okay? Losing my voice. Plus, there's a pretty lengthy video. So this, I'm going to skim this. 2014. Killed the messenger due to backlash. Flawed. Okay, flawed. Okay, so his own newspaper said his story was flawed after tons of pressure from the national mainstream media. They actually buckled and published an editorial saying that Gary Webb's documented report is flawed. So Gary resigned, and he wrote a book called The Dark Alliance. Okay, sadly became important of his career, helped lead the... Gary divorced from his wife in 2000 after resigning from the Mercury blah, 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 blah. I can't read anymore. My voice hurts. I'm sorry, guys. But I'm going to play you the video. And there's also plenty of video with Freeway Ricky Ross talking about Gary Webb and what a good guy he was. Okay, here's a good part I probably should read. On December 10th, 2004, Gary Webb was found dead of two allegedly self-inflicted gunshots to the head, as the Independent reported in an interview with Gary's ex-wife, Susan Webb. When removal men arrived on the morning of December 10th, 2004, they found a sign on his front door which read, "Please do not enter. Call 911 for assistance. Thank you." Webb's corpse was found in the bedroom with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Self-inflicted. Think about that, people. Think about shooting yourself twice in the head. Alright, here's the video. Thanks for watching. Watch this video. Gary Webb is an American hero. Also look up Freeway Rick Ross interviews and stuff about this. Also look up Michael Rupert, an LAPD detective who was almost killed for exposing this same story right here. It's all connected. Alright, guys. Here's the video. Alright, here's the Gary Webb video. In his own words. Remember, people, this is an American hero right here.
Investigative reporting is being sort of squeezed out of the picture, and I think intentionally, because it tends to ruffle feathers. I mean, good investigative reporting does ruffle feathers, and it draws lawsuits, and it gets newspapers in trouble.
Old pirates, yes, they rob I. Sold I to the merchant ship.
My name's Gary Webb. I am an investigative journalist. I've been an investigative journalist for about 25 years for daily newspapers. And in 1996, I wrote a series of stories entitled Dark Alliance, which was about CIA involvement in drug trafficking. What my story showed was that the cocaine that was being sold in those neighborhoods was coming from mainly one source, and this one source was being used to finance a guerrilla war in Central America. The general idea of the CIA dealing drugs was something that the American mainstream press had never written about before, and that's why it prompted outrage among blacks, among drug reform activists, among politicians, by the CIA, by every federal agency involved in the drug war, because it showed they weren't doing their jobs, that it was a fraud. Right after we published the stories, the support we got from the media was very favorable. Newsweek magazine did a big piece on the story and said it was well documented and well researched. The website was getting like 1 million hits a day. There were marches in Watts, there were marches in Compton, there were candlelight vigils. Every California senator demanded an official investigation. So the story itself is really building momentum. The government reaction was no reaction. And this, I believe, was a very careful strategy, because nobody was going to believe the government if they came out and said we didn't do it. The proof was fairly overwhelming, since we had all these government documents showing that it had happened. So what happened was they let the so-called liberal press speak for them. And they had the national security reporters at the Washington Post, who coincidentally used to work for the CIA, write stories saying it doesn't mean anything. It was a distraction from what the story said, and it became sort of a media war between the Mercury News, which stood behind the story at that point, and the rest of the establishment media, who wanted us to back away from it. And part of that reason was because these major newspapers had written about this issue back in the 1980s, but had written about it very dismissively, as if this is nonsense, it doesn't happen, it never happened. And then 10 years later, we came back with documentation showing that it was absolutely true, and that it was worse than we had imagined. We had gotten the story out around them, and we had gotten it out in a big way that they couldn't control, and that was through the internet. And I think a lot of this was directed to the Mercury News to say, we don't care what documentation you have, we don't care what kind of story you've got, we set the national news agenda. And if we don't like your story, we will kill your story regardless of its truth.
You hear that, people? Doesn't matter if your story is true. If we don't like it, we bury it. That's your mainstream media, and one of the few things I like about Trump is that he actually calls them out.
The media rejoiced when this came out because it meant they had won. They had forced a newspaper to back away from a story that was true, simply because of this barrage of criticism, of mindless criticism, essentially, that really took its toll on the editors of the newspaper. And they were being seen as sort of outcasts from the club. And I think they made a political decision that it was better in the long run to take a dive on this story and get back in the good graces of the rest of the media. It was essentially a war between my editors and myself, because I wouldn't apologize for the story or back away from the story, and fought them on it publicly. And so they transferred me to a bureau that was 140 miles from where I lived, and I called in sick a lot. One of the things I'm proudest of in regards to that story is the website that the Mercury News set up, because it really was the first time that a newspaper brought its readers not only into the interior of the paper, but into the reporters' notebooks. This was a story that, as I told my editors, had a very high unbelievability factor built into it. A lot of people were going to say, this can't be true. And this story became a sensation because of the website, not because of the story, but because people could get to it. And they could never have gotten to it before, because the San Jose Mercury News is a small regional newspaper in Northern California.
And he makes another great point here, that the internet, open media, as the First Amendment was framed after, it's supposed to be wide open. Anybody and everybody's supposed to be media. This one guy came out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, he's a lifelong investigative journalist, but he had the cojones to expose the CIA at drug trafficking. They've been doing it forever. They've been caught with C-130s full of cocaine. But the internet is the wrecking ball for the mainstream media.
that you couldn't read if you lived in New York, or you couldn't read if you lived in LA. But this story you could read anywhere in the world and see all of our documentation. So it became, and we did this on purpose to make it very hard to knock down, to make it very difficult for people to say this didn't happen. But they said it didn't happen anyway.
And that's the delusion that Americans live in. They just cognitive dissonance. They can't, if they don't want to believe it, they just won't. That's about at least 75% of the public is that way. American public.
Old pirates, yes, they rob I. Sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hand of the redemption song.
So in 2004, they claim he committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head. Twice in the head. He was basically murdered. I want to say this is the same guy who exposed the Oklahoma City bombing, but let me do my research and get back to you on that. But this is an American patriot. This one guy out of hundreds of millions of people had the guts to expose the truth about the CIA and government in general. He risked his life and he lost his life. R.I.P. Gary Webb, American hero, American patriot. Thanks for watching, everyone. Subscribe, join, click the thumbs up, click the bell. Go to John's Coin Rings on Etsy. I love you. Peace and tranquility.